He won't let the elderly woman leave. Bystanders contact the police when they understand why. Jamal was an African-American Muslim guy in his mid-30s who was a mosaic of ambitions and tenacity. Like a tapestry made of delicate strands of culture and faith, he carried his ancestry with him. The rhythmic pulses of New York's busy streets blended with the melodic calls to prayer from his grandfather's mosque throughout his early years. After earning a degree in engineering, Jamal glued his aspirations into technological circuit boards. He saw his computer repair shop as a community center that would bridge the digital divide in his area while simultaneously fixing screens and wiring. But the buzz of reality was sharper. His store fought against the waves of gentrification and economic inequality, tucked away between a laundry and a fading painting. Every day he had to deal with the corrosive effects of institutionalized prejudice, the suspicious looks that lingered for too long, and the clients who paused at his store's entrance. His freely displayed faith frequently served as an unjustified focal point for discrimination. The gloomy remnants of winter shrouded the city on the day Jamal met Mrs. Evelyn. The scuttle of shoes and the fragmented melody of city life were enhanced by the subway station, a gigantic echo chamber. Because of his acute awareness of the underlying currents, Jamal was able to see things that most people would have missed, such as the way shadows clung to the corners. The fluorescent lights flashed like the city's heartbeat, and the silent stories written in the faces of onlookers. He saw another shadow as he made his way down the steps to the platform. Mrs. Evelyn was notable not because of the amount of space she took up, but rather because of the sense of melancholy that appeared to surround her. The turbulence clouding her delicate blue eyes told of inner tempests. Wearing a coat that had seen better winters, she held a crumpled paper in her palm and appeared to shrink against the chilly tiles. The same indications of defeat that Jamal had seen in the mirror in his darkest moments were there in her. He approached her gently, intruding subtly into her depressing bubble. The warmth of his grin was irreconcilable with the platform's coldness. Mrs. Evelyn's internal conflict temporarily ceased as her eyes locked with his. Her anguish, however, intensified into a mute cry for freedom as the train's lights came on, signaling its imminence. Jamal's first response was to grab her arm for protection. His kind yet powerful voice tried to bind her to life. "Please wait, let's talk." However, fear is a powerful enemy, and Mrs. Evelyn's response was to lash out, attracting the crowd's attention with her shouts. Like a jury, they made their decisions based on prejudice, seeing the caricature they had been taught to fear rather than a guy giving a lifeline. However, Jamal refused to let go. Hope itself was in his grasp, not just Mrs. Evelyn. A guy clinging to a stranger with the promise of kindness rather than malicious purpose drowned out the murmur of what could have been as the train thundered by. The constant stream of people filled the subway station's arteries, making it a living thing. The city's normal hurry filled the air on this particular day, but the regular melody was about to be broken by a far stronger undercurrent. A lifeline cast across the gap of Mrs. Evelyn's misery, Jamal's hand was firmly on her arm. His eyes met hers, pools of sincere concern, begging her to hold on to the frayed edges of her world for a bit longer. However, the train, a metal monster unconcerned with the frailty of human existence, was roaring nearer. Jamal was the sudden break in Mrs. Evelyn's somber symphony of anguish, which was at its peak. The tension overflowed around them. Encased in their own bubbles, commuters started to pay attention. A tapestry of terror and intrigue was woven across the gathering in whispers. Misunderstandings led to distrust, and Jamal's presence, a stark contrast to the elderly woman's pallid frailty, painted a picture that was far from accurate. The choreography was wild as the scenario developed. With her shouts sounding like a siren song over the station's din, Mrs. Evelyn's terror became evident. "Aid! Leave me alone!" She blurted out the words, warped by miscommunication and dread. A soothing counterpoint was Jamal's voice. "I can't let you do this. Let's just chat, please." However, the preconceptions of the audience were filtered through their eyes. And rather than a rescue, they perceived a danger. Someone grabbed for a phone, their palms shaking with the misdirected adrenaline of civic obligation. "There's a man attacking an old woman at the station," was a brief whisper that was sufficient to call the police. The cops arrived quickly, and their decisions were even quicker. With a mix of power and compassion, blue uniforms stand out among the throng. When they arrived at the duo, however, the situation was far from straightforward. With a finger full of presumptions, one observer said, "He's trying to hurt her." Unwavering in his grasp, Jamal attempted to describe the urgency of the situation and the disaster he was attempting to prevent. However, Jamal's comments were lost in translation, since the law speaks in a language of facts that is unaffected by context. His act of refusing to let go of Mrs. Evelyn's arm, which was motivated by a deep-seated worry for her life, was misinterpreted as hostility. His fingers were wrenched open by the cops, whose hands were trained to act first and decipher afterward. Jamal resisted because he recognized the brittleness of the trust he had established with Mrs. Evelyn. It was a short fight, a fierce taboo of obligation and desperation. Jamal's gaze never left Mrs. Evelyn when they cuffed him. "I'm here to help you," he continued in a voice that was a constant light. "Don't do this, please." The train came and departed, leaving a trail of apathy behind it. The station let out a breath, the tension vanishing into a fresh story in which Jamal was the handcuffed adversary. The fact that Mrs. Evelyn was still upright was a subtle reminder of how complicated the situation had just become. In the perspective of the audience, Jamal was simply another man in the back of a police car, a narrative that was over before it was fully told, even if his perseverance had saved a catastrophe. Silently standing aside from the crowd was Clara, who was 8 months pregnant and carrying the weight of her pregnancy. In the middle of the daily grind, her presence was a silent notice as her palm lay protectively over her bulging tummy. But she didn't miss anything. They adopted Jamal's empathetic stance in opposition to Mrs. Evelyn's impending despair. Her maternal instincts came into play as the sight in front of her descended into mayhem. She saw what others missed, the reality of Jamal's desperate hold. Clara's phone was already filming, a digital eyewitness to the misinterpreted bravery unfolding in front of her amid the growing clamor of poor judgment. Clara's heart pounded as the cops showed up, moving through the crowd with a commanding ease. The discriminatory yells of the bystanders overpowered Jamal's supplications, and as he was handcuffed and prepared for transportation, a wave of urgency drove her forward. "Wait!" With a single statement that carried the weight of justice, Clara's voice cut through the noise. She overcame her parental demeanor, giving her an aura that caused the police to stop moving. She pressed, "You got it all wrong," while holding up her phone like a shield. The truth was shown on the screen in raw pixel form. Jamal's bravery, not violence. Defense, not assault. As the story they had created fell apart, the cops' gazes were fixed on the little screen. There was no denying the footage. Instead of acting like a criminal, Jamal acted like a protector. The stiffness of their duty gave way to the recognition of their mistake, and their stance softened. Law enforcement made a rare admission of haste and misunderstanding by issuing an apology. Despite being shocked, Jamal quietly and dignifiedly took their comments. Even though his own dignity had been openly questioned, he continued to worry about the old woman whose life had just been spared. Jamal approached Mrs. Evelyn, who was standing there looking confused and trembling, as soon as the formalities ended and he was once again free. Gently he said, "Coffee?" as a sign of peace and a pledge that he would not keep her story a secret. Clara's gaze followed them as they made their way to the neighborhood cafe, a witness once more, but this time to the start of a healing process. The evidence on her phone was a potent witness to the events of the day, so she put it away. A pleasant diversion from the icy station was the cozy cafe. Mrs. Evelyn told her story over boiling mugs. She talked about loneliness, boys lost to quiet and time, and a life that seemed more and more like an echo than a voice. Jamal's empathy soothed the years of agony engraved on her face as he listened. His genuine offer of friendship helped to unite strangers and like-minded people. The initial strands of companionship were weaved with the promise of support and ongoing discussion as they departed the cafe with a standing agreement to meet again. Meanwhile, Clara had decided on something. She couldn't keep her footage hidden on her phone. The world had to witness the reality of that day, the precipice of human hopelessness, the haste to pass judgment, and the modest bravery of a man whose sole goal was to save a life. A few keystrokes transformed the tale of Jamal and Mrs. Evelyn from being theirs alone to being told to the entire world.
Like the pages of a book, the days that followed the incident at the subway station revealed more and more depths in Jamal and Mrs. Evelyn's bond. Their monthly coffee dates turned to become a ritual, a place where they could escape the noise of the outside world. The frost surrounding Mrs. Evelyn's heart melted as winter gave way to spring, forming streams of stories and laughter between her and Jamal at that charming corner cafe with its jumble of chairs and the aroma of roasted beans. They told each other stories about their lives. Jamal talked about his early years, Ramadan meals, and his family's loving hugs. Mrs. Evelyn recalled her own sepia-toned recollections of evenings spent beneath starry skies and days spent with children laughing. They discovered an unanticipated connection in one another, an understanding that, in spite of the wrinkles in their lives, they were just chapters apart and both pages of the same book. Their friendship developed into a tapestry with strands of empathy and comprehension. Mrs. Evelyn's knowledge served as a beacon of guidance for Jamal, who saw her as the grandmother he had lost so long ago. For Mrs. Evelyn, Jamal was the son she had long desired, and his visits were a ray of hope as she approached her latter years. In the meantime, Clara's video had become independent and was causing waves in the huge online space. It traveled from phone to phone and screen to screen until Jamal's heroic deed became a movement rather than a single incident. Once marred by bias, the story now emphasized humanity's finest qualities. Once struggling, Jamal's business turned into a community center, demonstrating the value of second chances. Once hesitant customers now smiled as they walked in, and Jamal's vision of using technology to bridge gaps started to take shape. In addition to sales, the video drew attention. Jamal received invitations to speak at gatherings and tell his experience, which connected the themes of community value, mental health awareness, and racial and religious peace. He became a voice for those whose experiences had not yet been told, for people who stood at the nexus of truth and misunderstanding. Mrs. Evelyn was also affected by what had happened that day. Her estranged sons expressed regret and optimism in their voices after being moved by the widely shared story. Although reconciliation was a gradual process, Mrs. Evelyn successfully negotiated the choppy seas of re-establishing familial ties with Jamal's support. As the public learned about Jamal and Mrs. Evelyn, their tale became a lighthouse. It discussed the value of seeing past appearances, the transformational potential of a small act of kindness, and the strength that comes from standing together. Their tale turned into a mirror, reflecting the finest qualities of the listeners and inspiring them to discover their inner Jamal, provide a helping hand when necessary, and cling to the human bonds that united them all. Kindness had a contagious effect, affecting people's lives and mending the community's wounds. Once strangers on a subway station, Jamal and Mrs. Evelyn now stood together as symbols of optimism, their unusual relationship proving that sometimes the most meaningful connections are made in the briefest of circumstances.